Welcome, Christophe Lavigne. Welcome, Carmelo Gordian. Good morning. I'm Liz Wiley. I'm here presenting with Constance Bost in Houston. I'm the Honorary Consul of France for Austin. I'm also part of French Tech, and I'm an attorney in Austin. Constance is our very dynamic head of the French American Chamber in Houston, one of the largest, most active chambers in the United States. And we're thrilled to do events with them. They always go flawlessly when we have Constance and her team. So like we said, we have chambers, but this is mostly French Tech. French Tech is all about supporting France's dynamic tech ecosystem and supporting French entrepreneurs and founders setting up in Texas and especially Austin and Houston. So today we have a very inspirational story. We're very fortunate to have as part of our tech ecosystem in Austin, Christophe Lavigne. Christophe and his company LDR Spine started in, actually, I think I read, actually in a garage in France. We'll hear more about that. In Troyes, France, an incubator in France. And fortunately, he ended up here in Austin, Texas, and we're going to hear all about that story. He was lucky, we'll say. He was connected with all the right people. And one of those right people was having a really good attorney, Carmelo Gordian, to lead him and his company through not only the change for a big fundraise in Austin in the United States for a very significant product, but also adjusting for the cultural differences. And we're going to hear how Carmelo and his team were very sensitive and used that to their advantage in this big growth and fundraised and went public that allowed Christophe's company to go public. I should clarify, Christophe had two co-founders, and we'll hear about them. So it was all about having a really wonderful team. And so what we're here to talk about today is the start from Troyes, France, and going to the exit in 2016 for $1.1 billion by Zimmer Biomet. Christophe also is a great representative of Austin because he's a musician, and music is very much part of the Austin tech ecosystem. So hopefully we'll hear more about that in your band. Maybe you can talk about your upcoming album. Anyway, well, welcome, Christophe. We will start with the story. I think it's important to let people know what was the product. We talk about the journey and the start in Troyes, France, but let's talk about your co-founders and what the product was that was so hugely successful.
Yes, so thank you. Thank you for inviting me to participate. So my name is Christophe Lavigne, and I'm still specialized in spine surgery. So my first job was working for a small company in France who was specialized in spine surgery, and we learned a lot. And my two partners were already part of the company. So we met at this company when we were working together. So big picture, we have designed a product who was completely new, giving the ability to surgeons to treat a pathology with a new approach. So I would say it's always nice to be innovative, but as you all know, being innovative is also not always easy because you have to explain to people why you are doing something differently. And especially when it relates to surgery, I'm sure you understand that it's even more complicated. So big picture with my two partners. So I am the L of LDR. LDR was the name of the company. And Mr. D was in charge of the R&D. And Mr. R, Patrick, was in charge of sales and management. So from the top, we really decided to make sure that everyone understood what he had to do for the company. And I think it was part of something will lead us to success is making sure that we will not have, conflict or things like that based on the fact that we knew exactly what we had to do for the benefits of the company. So we started the company at the end of 2000 in Troyes. So for the people who are from France, they know that Troyes is about 2 hours drive from Paris in a very small place, like a garage, that's correct. And we ended up at the end being a public company with more than 600 direct employees and being in 30 countries. And we did the IPO in 2013.
And you tell us about how you decided or how the idea came about that you needed to go to the US. It's a big market. People need to do that, but you're in a particular sector that clinical trials were important. Can you talk about how you decided how much you needed to raise and then how you started making contacts? How did that happen back then? This was 2005. Is that right? What year was that?
The first years were especially focused on R&D and designing product, validating the product. As you understand, in the medical field, you have to go through a lot of different validation processes. Coming back to the United States, US was or is still, I think, 70% of the business opportunity for us. So ignoring the US, it clearly would have been a big mistake. Now, coming to the US was not an easy path in the sense that the regulatory processes were different compared to what we had in Europe, and I would say a little bit more complicated. And it was required for us to conduct clinical studies. What it means is that we had to raise money to be able to finance this process. And we didn't know exactly when the product would be approved, because it's a process where you have to go step by step, and until you have the validation one, you cannot go to the step number 2. So you can give an idea, but it's very hard to tell, especially investors, for sure I will be approved at that time. So it was clearly a risk that we have identified, and we wanted to make sure that our investors understood the risk. But I think that when you explain and what may happen, and make sure that your investors understand the time frame and that it can change, you have a good chance of success. So we conducted this study. It was the first time for a company to conduct a study like we did, and fortunately we have been approved. But it took more than 8 years and more than 70 million invested in this process. So coming back to your question, yeah, we had to raise money, and it was very hard at that time to raise enough money in Europe. By chance, I would say we have been contacted by one person who was doing some research in the new trends for spine surgery, and he contacted us, and this is how everything started. And we had the chance to be in contact with a company called Austin Ventures, and Carmelo was their lawyer, and this is how we met. And this company never invested in a company coming from France. They never invested in a biomedical device company, so it was a first for them, as it was for us, because to be honest, we didn't know the United States, and I think I've been once before. So, and I thought I was speaking English, but I realized I was not speaking American, especially Texan. But anyway, I would say that what I like about American people is that they don't judge you on your accent, because as you can see, I didn't lost my accent, and that's fine. But yeah, we came here and we met great people, and we have been able to close the first deal with Austin Venture, and this was the start for us of the I would say US adventure for the company.
Did you have to reach out and make a lot of contacts in the United States before you found Austin Ventures, or?
So, I mean, to be honest, we sent a lot of, dossier on, but, we didn't have a lot of answers. I think that it's always like that. What was very hard for us was it was a premiere. We never raised money outside of France. And to be honest, we were not money raiser experts. We were beginners. And so we were just trying and, just see if people will react. And I would say that Austin Venture has been the one who really connected very fast and sent someone to visit us in France. And I think it was also very important for them to really understand what we were doing. They also agreed to come to see a surgery at that time. So I think it was also part of the process for them to understand, what does this mean to invest in a company we specialize in spine surgery? At the end of the day, it means people. And I think they really like what they saw at that time. And I think that when they came back to Austin, they decided to explore more the LDR opportunity. And at the end of the day, with the help of Carmelo, we have been able to close the financing.
How long did that stage last from the first moment you met Austin Ventures, which was a venture capital fund here in Austin, very important to the Austin tech ecosystem and its robust beginnings? How long was that whole process between getting introduced, deciding to make the investment, and getting that funding?
Yeah, I think Carmelo, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think something around 4 to 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm thinking when the meeting we had in Paris, which wasn't the very first introduction, but it was certainly when we were focused on the transaction, was in August, maybe. We closed in December.
Yeah, so it went quite fast.
That would have been about right. There was conversation before that, but there was decision for principals from Austin Ventures, myself, went over to Paris and met in the offices of Rothschild with Christophe and an attorney, French attorney, Jean-Louis. Pierre Remy was the Rothschild person. So, and I kind of view that as the start of, because from there we started to draft term sheets and try to talk about structure. How would we do this? What would we need to do? And so.
Well, Christophe, what was that like? Was this a very new or different experience to be working with the lawyers so early in the process? Can you speak to maybe the difference in working with lawyers in France on a fundraising and this new, completely new legal environment you had to address and understand to do this fundraise in Austin?
Yeah, so the first thing, before what we did initially, because we raised money in France when we started. And I believe that most of the French companies start by raising money, maybe with friends or family or seed money from French firms. So the first big difference is everything is in English. And that's a big difference. The second, I would say, main difference, I think, at least to me, is that you don't belong to French regulation. You are now acting with using the US regulation. And I'm not a lawyer, but I quickly realized that these are very different. And I think it's part of the difficulty to make sure that you have a lawyer, especially for a French company, who understand these differences, because he will have to help you and guide you during the discussion or negotiation, and make sure he doesn't misunderstand, what is asked or why it's asked in this way. And same thing I would say on the other side, for the US, a company would decide to invest in a French company, even if most of the time they invest in the United States, so not directly in France, but they also have to understand the differences on how French people approach these regulatory matters. So this was, to me, a completely new experience. And I would say we have been lucky enough to have really, on both sides, to have lawyers who wanted to make the deal and just didn't want to, express their ego or demonstrate that they were better than, the other. Carmelo has been clearly key on this, but Jean-Louis, who was my lawyer in France, same thing. He was smart enough to understand the differences and make sure that we just find a fair on a common ground, for both sides. I think that's the key. Make sure that you understand what you agree and that it's fair for both sides. But I think Carmelo can be very helpful also on this subject.
Yeah, there is at a very high level, French law is based on the French Civil Code. US law is based on English common law, and there's fundamental differences. And also just culturally, in terms of what venture capitalists in the US view as second nature. We're going to talk about the board and the board seats and voting, and there's certain things that you can't do without getting our permission, meaning protective provisions. And for a French company, these topics are, a number of them are new. They may have had an investor that was on their board, but they didn't necessarily sit and have to think about, well, whether there's a control issue or what does that mean? And there's a list of issues. Jean-Louis was very helpful to kind of, as we discussed it, you know, the key in all of it is an approach that, you know, nobody assumes they're right. We just have to figure out what's going to work well in this context and make sure we're addressing concerns, because what makes the deal not happen is that people have concerns and you don't address them. Then they get uncomfortable, and then they convince themselves it's better off not to do the deal than do the deal. So you have to, and it's a complicated deal. It's throughout. It's from the beginning till you finally close the documents. There's always a question that's somebody sees something or has it, and it raises a concern. Sometimes it's something that shouldn't raise a concern. Other times it's a legitimate concern, and you have to address it. But you have to be aware of that. And I think when you have a bicultural deal, that's very, very important, and that's true wherever you are in the world, in France. But that is very true. And you know, we had very smart people, a smart team. You know, part of the LDR team included their investor, who was a venture capitalist at Rothschild, and you know, certainly understood things, but also was very French. So I should share with them, and you haven't shared. In our first meeting at Rothschild, which was a beautiful office in the middle of Paris, and in a townhome conference room as you entered. It's a mansion, I guess I would call it. We had very nice lunch. I think they served us cold duck and very, very nice wine and the like. But at some point we had a disagreement in the meeting, and the lead investor, the Rothschild partner, got up and left, which of course we were in his office. He was, you know, for the Americans, we would characterize that as very French. he didn't like whatever we were discussing, and so he left. And but then the French lawyer and Christophe said, no, just relax. Let us go have a cigarette. We'll be back. I don't know. So anyway, it went fine after that. I think we were, you know, but it was as we weren't necessarily used to that. We were looking and said, okay, well, I guess we'll just enjoy the wine and wait. So, but anyway, I thought that was very even. And after that, we all became very, very good friends. So.
Well, that raises a question I was going to ask. In fact, were there, in terms of getting used to doing this deal in the US, this fundraise, were there any issues with the French investors who were already on board? You had to go through educating them as well. They had board seats, I assume, and there was the parent company, and you created a subsidiary in the US, I imagine. So it was still wholly owned, I guess. But nevertheless, were there issues in bringing along the investors along the process and explaining it to them? Or how did you manage that?
So for me, at first, the decision to look for US investors was made in agreement with my existing investors, which was at that time Rothschild, the French office. So, you know, I didn't have to, I would say, force anything. We were looking for money. We were not able to find enough money in Europe, unfortunately. So we needed to go to the US. And also, because it was a US project, I thought that it would be smart to add to the team US investors who understand, you know, the regulation or everything that we didn't really know. So this was on paper, you know, the perfect team, having, you know, the US side on the French side, with our history on keeping, you know, I would say the roots, but making sure we also understand the US market. After that, you know, when you start the negotiation discussion on negotiation, you know, I mean, you always have some points of I would say, disagreement or discussion. So it's just part of the deal. I think the way as we manage it in France sometimes is clearly different compared to how it's done in the US. On what Carmelo just described, yeah, someone just leave the room because he's upset. I've never seen that in the US after. So I can imagine their reaction, you know, thinking, wow, this is, you know, but I would not say that in France we do that all the time. No, but it can happen. And, but, you know, I would say at the end of the day, as Carmelo said, we have been able to find a way. It was just a way to express, I think, from this investor, the fact that he really didn't agree with that, and he needed to say no. And you know, some people have different way to express that. But as Carmelo said, when we have been able really to figure out the issue and find the solutions, I think we have been very fortunate to have these people working together, because very smart people, different approach, different culture, but the company became a French-American company. So it was really the reality of the company. In fact, the board reflected the reality of the company, which I personally think it's what you need. You need, because sometimes I've seen companies where board it's only made of financial people, and I'm not sure that it's the best way to develop the company. I think you need to have a board who just represent who you are, and I think it's what we had.
Well, and so go ahead, Carmelo.
I want to mention, because on this topic, and it may be relevant to some people that are watching, listening, the three founders were very different. You know, Christophe, whose English is very, very good and has lived here. Then it would be Patrick Richard, who his English is pretty good. You could have certainly a conversation with him in English. You know, so if it was something he didn't understand, you wouldn't realize it. And then there was Henri Denville, who spoke very little English. So,
no, at all.
So when you're doing the kinds of changes and putting in place the systems you're putting in place, there's a constant need to go back from English to French, the French lawyer talking, and then being cognizant that Henri is at a different place than Patrick. So it's not just the people that are on the board, for example, but there's a constant communication dynamic that you have to be sensitive to and realize that. And whether you're the lawyer, whether you're the business person, whoever, or the investor, you have to keep that in mind. But you only get exposed to Christophe, so you have to really understand. It truly was a French-American company, and so the ability, and Christophe did a very good job over the years of trying to recruit people who spoke French. So they were members of the team, as many as could be found. That was always an asset for the team, to hire someone that had some ability to speak French, because you were going to be communicating at times in French with the team. And we actually had lawyers on our side that when we had to speak to employees, we had lawyers within the firm that spoke French, and I would involve them because I didn't have that skill set. So as much as I tried. So, but anyway, it was very, 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 very interesting experience from that perspective, and a great, great lesson. So.
That was one fundraise, but you all worked together to do the IPO to get on the Nasdaq as well, right? So that once you think you understand how to do fundraise in the US, you do a completely different fundraise. Christophe, did you envision, was that part of the plan when you started raising funds in the United States, that you might go public, raise funds in the public market?
Honestly, no. Honestly, I mean, I would say every entrepreneur may have a dream to go public if it's what he thinks that is the best for his company. Because I think going public is just a way, at least for me, it was a way to raise money to really develop the company more compared to just through private equity. But no, when we received the first, I mean, I had no plan to come to the United States. I mean, nothing was planned this way. My point being, for an entrepreneur, we always, yeah, we have dreams, but I was focusing on the, day-to-day activity, and we needed to raise money to be able to survive. And I think that at the beginning, lots of companies are going through that. You have to raise money because you want to be there in 2 years. Yeah, you dream about, 15 years away being a public company on the next Facebook or whatever. But the reality of today is you have to raise the first million. And I would not say it's easier later on, but I would say the first million to raise to me, have been the hardest because, you need to find people who accept to take lots of risk. Yeah. When we have raised money in the US, I would say the company was different. We were more established. We started to have revenue. We had a better visibility on the regulatory aspect. We already went through FDA validation. So, we were able to give more comfort to new investors. I would say, to me, I've seen this as different discussions, because we already had established a very good base of investors. We also had demonstrated that our product had, a great opportunity in the US market, and we had surgeons, behind also this product. So the type of investors that we met later on were different compared to the one we met initially. And it's just normal, you have some investors focusing on seed capital or Series A, and some of them are focusing more on Series B or Series C or pre-IPO. And ongoing IPO was another experience, raising money through the roadshow, one of the things that I discovered. That to answer your question, I think you just have to make sure you focus on the right investor at the stage of your company, making sure that this fits, because if not, you will just waste your time.
Well, before I pass the microphone over to Constance to raise a couple of questions with Carmelo specifically, what would be your advice these days to young entrepreneurs? I know you spend a lot of time still helping French founders navigate their way through the US market and Texas market. And things have changed since you did all these fundraisers. And now we've got BP France, who supports a lot of network. Things have changed. Nevertheless, I think, what advice would you give to a French founder, entrepreneur looking to start thinking about fundraising in the United States?
Yeah, I would say first, don't be shy. Don't think that your accent will be an issue if you have one. Even if your English is not perfect, I think that US investors have this ability to overcome these type of things. But initially, I know that for me at least, I thought that this would be difficult just because English was not my primary language. But I realized quickly that in fact it can become your strength, because people reminded me, they reminded the guy who had this French accent who wanted to revolutionize the spine surgery. My point being, don't be shy. I would say today it's a little bit different compared to 15 years ago, but if you have a good company, a good product, you need to be able to explain why you strongly believe that this is a good opportunity, because if you can't do it, no one will do it. But don't oversell on I think that you have to be completely transparent with your investors. Meaning, you don't know everything, and yeah, that's normal. I mean, if you know everything, you're not normal. I remember meeting some investors initially asking me, so you are here because you need money? I said, yeah, because if I don't need money, I don't need you, right? But so I would say just be yourself, and don't be shy. I think that US investors are looking for great company, great product, even if it's coming from France. I think they really like it. I think they want to have more. So
great, thank you. Constance, back to you in Houston.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, thank you so much. This is a super interesting. Let me say that the audience can ask some question in the Q&A if you like. Do not hesitate to write to us some questions. I prepared some questions as well for Carmelo on your role and what does it mean to be a lawyer in that context. But first, my first question is, Carmelo, how did you identify that Christophe and his team will be amazing? What was the reason that from the beginning you knew that you wanted to work with them? What was special about them, and what are your advice for companies coming from France?
Yeah, I don't know that I would have used the word amazing, but what I would say is it was fascinating from the very start, meaning we were trying to do something that hadn't been done before with the people that I knew, which were very large investors here in the US, and both investing in a company that had started outside of the United States and was coming to the United States. And also the management team wasn't based here. And so culturally what that meant. And so that was a very, to me, my nature is I like challenges, and that all felt like a challenge. But the important thing was they wanted to say, yes, we can do this. And when Austin Ventures asked me, what do you think? My answer was, absolutely, we can do this. we let me think about how we do it and how we make sure everybody's comfortable and how it fits within the model that you're used to, because they did have a model that they wanted to see. So you had to shape it that way. But at the same time, you had to preserve what was going on in France and how that everything that was going on there in terms of management and how the businesses were being run and making it all together. So that to me made it special. It's true anytime you do business with anyone in other parts of the world, and culturally it was fabulous because people are different. The French lawyer, they're slightly different. I will tell a story which I think speaks to this company and probably the differences. We started, I think I'd mentioned when we first talked, that Christophe made it a point to have a board meeting in France every year, at least once, and in the US, where the board members would have to attend and management would have to attend. And then there were other meetings where not everybody was there, but at least one where everybody needed to be there. And so we started kind of from the very beginning going to France. It was very nice in the summer. I mentioned the meeting was generally in July around Bastille Day, which is a very nice, and there were some fans of Lance Armstrong, so they were happy to be there during the Tour de France. So a lot of people extended their trip to include a few other things. But having said that, I remember when I first went, it was very typical for the Americans, and what the Americans did was they flew into Charles de Gaulle. They would have a car pick them up and a car take them to Troyes. Maybe they stay in Paris at night and then have a car take them to Troyes. And when they were done, have a car. And I remember for some reason, when I first started, the assistants that were coordinating, there was one in the US, one in France, asked, how would you like to travel? And so I sent Jean-Louis and Pierre a note and said, well, when you go to the board meeting, you're in Paris. I'm going to land first. I'll spend the night there. How do you go? And he said, well, we take the train. No Frenchman would take a car from Paris. That's not even efficient, because the train is much faster and plenty comfortable. And so I said, well, great. How do I take the train? And Pierre was, oh, don't worry. I'll get you a ticket. Just meet us in the train station, which is what I did. And what I started to do. But that was a sense of, it was a real bridge builder in a lot of respects, because on those train rides, I would ride back and forth with Jean-Louis and Pierre, and we would talk about whatever. We wouldn't talk about the company. It was a good opportunity to spend a few hours just talking about other things and what was going on in France and what was going on in the US. And so it was very, that was a great experience. But I think and funny enough is after I did that, some of the management team asked me how I got there. And I said, I took the train. They started taking the train because they realized is that, well, that makes sense, particularly the financial people that watch the number, you know, the expense. And so, but that, I think culturally, that's what made the company great. And I'm sure it occurred on both sides. I'm sure some of the French people, when they came to the US, all of a sudden they became exposed to things that they never really thought about. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have a question from Frank, who said that France is really well known here for its art de vivre culture, but we have amazing tech in France as well. So from your point of view, what France should do to get more visibility on their tech ecosystem, which is amazing?
And we can both answer that question. Christophe may have a perspective. I think the world has become much more global since we did the first LDR deal. If you look at where venture capital gets spent, at this point, it's almost 50-50 outside of the US than in the US. Now that's a little deceptive because Asia has a huge influence in those numbers, more so than Europe. So Europe is still behind, for example, the Chinese market and the Japanese market. And so there is growth that has to occur in Europe. But having said that, almost all of the major investors, wherever they are, and including the US investors, have invested outside of their home country. They've now, what 20 years ago was not, they had never done. Today, they almost all have done. So you have to just try to figure out is who is interested in looking at France if you're looking to raise capital. And it's not just in the US, raise capital in London or in Asia, because you may have products that relate to, if the nice thing about a lot of products, and one of France's strength is in the life sciences. There's great institutes throughout the country. There's great schools of education. And so you always see innovation coming out of France in all areas of health related, but then also in technology. You have a long history of certain technology leaders and communications and all kinds of things, travel. So there's lots of opportunity, and I think people are very interested in it. One thing I also would say is, and I'll say this as an American, generally Americans are very curious about France. I think Christophe alluded to that, but usually when they hear a French accent, it's not something that, it's something they a lot of Americans either have been to Paris or would love to go to Paris. That, all they've seen is movies where Paris is. And so they find it kind of interesting to hear a little more. And so I think it's easy to kind of go from that general interest into kind of, well, what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish, and find people that would try to help you. I don't know, Christophe, if you might want to add to that or speak to some of that.
Yeah, no, I think that the first thing you have to, I think as an entrepreneur, maybe one of the common mistakes we do, because I did some of them, it's we try to be a US company, but we are not. And I think the first things to do is really to be yourself. I really think that is key. Means, you meet US investors, you're a French company, yes. I think we have incredible engineering schools in France, and we have great engineers, we have great ideas. I think most of the time we don't know how to protect our ideas, and we are always concerned about IP, make sure we understand the difference between IP in the United States and IP in France or in Europe. I think that's the thing that an entrepreneur is focusing on at the beginning: technology, IP, make sure that you're protected. But maybe the thing that is missing, at least to me, was to understand how do I communicate all these great things that I have created in the United States to someone who may understand the opportunity. And I think that US people have this ability to be very good salespeople. I mean, every American people I know is a good salesman. All of them are really good. Sometimes in France, we are a little bit more shy, or we don't express the same way. Sometimes I think American people sees us because we don't express as much as they do. Sometimes they have some difficulty to analyze us. And I think it may be part of a disconnect that can happen, because it's rare to see a French guy come in and say, hey man, it's awesome. Wow. It's just not the way as we are trained, I think. But it's very common in the United States, and that's fine. Both are fine. But my point being, I think that, to come back to your question, what is missing? I think we have lots of good things that can fit the US market really well. I just think we need to be less shy and just be ourselves. And I think, honestly, if I have just one advice, I think it will be easier for an entrepreneur, because if you're yourself, you don't have to think about everything all the time. You're just yourself. And I think it's easier. and not being shy, in a sense that, sometimes we need maybe to sell a little bit more our technology, or be more straight to the point. Because I remember my first presentations for investors, they were just too big. It was 40 slides, lots of words everywhere. And in the US, it doesn't work. People just want to have, straight point. And if they need more detailed information, it will be part of a next step. So that's the type of things, but these are easy things to learn that we can do, I think, for US investors to understand more of the opportunities.
Thank you. We had another question for you, Christophe, about the first million. You said that the first million was it was the hardest. Yeah. And I would like to link that question to a question for Carmelo. Carmelo, I think it could be very interesting for you to tell us what is the role of the lawyer in that context. I think people, most of the French people see lawyer as a way to protect your company, but I think you go way beyond that. You have a very strategic role and some very good advice because you are able to have the global perspective and see on the long term what could happen for the company. So yeah, I would like to listen your point of view on that as well, Carmelo, and some recommendation for companies coming to the US on how they should decide on who should be their lawyer and what they should expect from the partnership with a lawyer.
Christophe, you want to go first? I think the first question was for you.
Yes, so how can I answer? The first million was really hard, yes, to raise. And because you have to convince the first investor to put money in your company. And, he's the first, and they understand the risk because it's part of what they do normally. But on the other side, how do you value your company when you have no revenue? I think it's always the same story. We think as entrepreneurs that we have, the best company ever, but we have no revenue, maybe the beginning of an IP, and we are 3 people in a garage. And you ask an investor to value you at $10 million or maybe more because you deserve it. But the investors on this side say, whoa, wait a minute. So I think the first, at least to me, was the most difficult, in the sense that also I was learning. I didn't have any experience doing it before. So, I was learning the different steps and stages to raise money. And you have also to start to accept the concept to be diluted. All this concept that you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is how it works. Okay. So that's why I think it's hard. It's not only hard to find, but it's also hard because it's part of a new negotiation, and you have to accept to give something, which is normal, because if an investor put money in your company, he needs something. And it can be a board seat, it can be, to share some decision processes, and it's dilution. Yes, it's part of the game. That's why I was saying, to me, it was the most difficult in my experience.
Okay, yeah, and building on that, a couple of things, and I'll talk about the role of lawyer, is so, as Christophe said, so one of a big cultural thing, and it's true with France, it's true with lots of places around the world, is that a lot of those the businesses are owned by families, and they're not used to bringing in investors into their business. They're used to hiring management or employing people and providing them incentives. But as far as ownership, that's not something that they have shared over many generations. So when you go from that cultural mindset to one where we're bringing in investors, and when we start, we own 100%. And after the first financing, we own 75%. After the second financing, we own 45%. And you hope when you go public, you own 25% or whatever the exit. And that's a good result. Pete, that's a very different experience. And you have to, as Christophe said, embrace and understand, yeah, but your 25% is then worth hundreds of millions of dollars, or whatever it's worth, tens of millions of dollars. And that's why you started the company. That's what you were trying to accomplish, not own it as such. So you have to think about that. Specifically on role of a lawyer. So what I would say is, to me, what's most important is that you're friends. It's not doing documents or telling you what's right or wrong or wouldn't the roadblocks that you're going to face. It's that you establish a friendship and a relationship such that you can be trusted by the clients and company that you're working with. And so that they understand that you're going to tell them what you think and be honest with them, protect their interests, but educate them at the same time. But also do that in the context of there's a constant conversation. If what you think is you're just being hired to do a deal, then you're not going to really achieve that. All you're going to do is, yeah, I can draft documents every day, and I do that every day. And sometimes there's companies, particularly big companies, that's what they want me to do. They don't necessarily have time, or that's not what they are. But when you're a young company, those relationships and those friendships are very important because you need kind of the conversation and advice that comes with that. Sometimes part of that friendship and advice is introducing the company to prospective investors or giving them a better sense of who they should be looking for from an investor. We never know who's actually going to fund the company, but as I always like to say, it's a bit of a numbers game. You're going to have to go on 20 dates to find the one that you really want to get engaged to. So that's a process, and you have to understand that. And you never really know who's going to make that introduction, but you should utilize the people that you know. And with Christophe, it would have been, his early board member who he knows. And once he met us, people that we know, whether it's Austin Ventures or whether it's the lawyers, and all of that kind of comes together. And the company did lots of financings, as has been pointed out, but those relationships all came from different places. And Christophe always, because they were people that knew the folks we were talking with, could go to the team around him and ask them what they thought, and whether it was an investment bank or whether it was a later stage investor, or that we had debt providers. We had 2 debt providers. One was a debt fund, one was a bank. And what do you think? And those were all relationships that people knew, and they could give him a good sense of it. So I think that that's what you want to have. And it's a trip that you're on, and you're on together. And so I think you have to look at it that way. And that's all independent of doing the legal work. You have to do the legal work and get it right and be an excellent lawyer. But, there are a lot of excellent lawyers who don't necessarily think of it that way, that, my job here is give me the term sheet, let me go do what I do, and I'll send you an email with all the documents. And if you have any question, let me know. That's, to me, that's the easy part from where I sit. So.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have a question that we have all the time is, when is it a good time to go to the US? What's the best stage? Which stage of maturity do you need when you approach investors in the US?
Christophe, you can, I certainly, so the market as it exists today is most interested in global companies. So you have to, very early on, you have to think of yourself, whether, even if you're just selling where you are, you're selling in a city in France and your customers are all there, or your customers in France, you have to kind of from a very early stage think that my opportunity is beyond where I am. And as soon as you start expressing the opportunity of your business as global in nature and start thinking about, and it may not be that it's going to be this year, it may be that it's in 2022 that you start to act on that. But when you start talking that way, that permits you then to go have conversations with investors that will understand that. They're what they're looking for are companies that are seizing on opportunities that have a very, very big market. If you're in the healthcare life science space, that's actually not that hard to do because people are the same everywhere. You're solving a problem that exists everywhere. So it's easy to, even though you may start in a certain place, say, yeah, but we can see how this would translate. Sometimes other things are more specific to problems that are local. So for example, if it's based on local laws as it relates to domestic workers or things like that, then it becomes more of a challenge how you translate something that you built that is applicable in your home country, France, for example, and how would that be applicable other places. But nonetheless, if you're going to raise that capital, you should be thinking that way. And that's one thing, obviously, at the time that LDR and kind of met with the folks that were in the US and started to explore, they were thinking of the US. They understood that there's an opportunity here. Our success, ultimately, we need to have a product that is approved in the US and selling in the US. And we know that's years away, but we know we have to start that process now. And so that was but that's an important thing for someone on the other side to hear. They understand, oh, you're just selling in France today, and you're starting to sell in Germany, and you've got a European map, and every country is a little bit different. So it's easier to enter and sell in certain places than it is in others. The US is not a particularly easy country to bring a product into. So you've thought about it, and you get help thinking about that. So that's what I would say, and that's what the market craves. So a lot of times answers that I give clients, it has to do with the fact that if what you're trying to do is raise capital, you always have to be yourself. And Christophe is 100% right. Don't make something up, but be aware that there's a market out there that you have to be responsive to as you're analyzing who you are and what you do. And if it's a fit, it's a fit. If it's primarily local, then your strategy should be one that's primarily local, and look for the capital that exists. There are venture capital firms that are in France, and they may, and private equity firms are in France. They may care less about that global nature, but most venture capital is really, that's what they're looking for. They want companies that do business all over the world. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Christophe, we have another great question for you, which is tell us about your scary moments, because we have the successful stories, but we want to hear about the times where you had some obstacles and times when you were scared.
Oh, many times. So the first 3 years we were so close to bankrupt, maybe 4 times.
Oh, wow.
So, it was just, these were really hard time because we didn't have money and it was the beginning. And so, yeah, I think every entrepreneur is going through this. I mean, most of the entrepreneurs are going through that time. You don't pay yourself for months. All the things that entrepreneurs has to go through, I think most of them at least. So these were the very scary moment. After that, it's scary. I would say key moments. You have key moments in a company. We have been lucky enough that most of them were positive. But key moment can be, are you still in agreement with your partners? I've seen so many companies with great product, great ideas, great people, but didn't make it because the founders at one point just didn't belong to each other anymore, or didn't like each other anymore. So I think these are key moments in the company, and this can be clearly a scary moment for the company. I think that for us, when we did the first surgery, this was a really scary moment. And when we waited for the FDA approval, because the process we did for regulatory approval, and I think it's true for also companies in the tech, if you have to go through approval with the FDA, you have no guarantee. So we invested, as I said, we invested more than $70 million in study. And one day you wait for the call from the FDA telling you yes or no. Mm. And I remember I was in my car and I received a call, and I said, wait, I will stop driving. And I was waiting, and I said yes. Because if he said no, no. So yeah, scary moment. I think you be prepared to have a lot of key moments in your entrepreneurial life, but I mean, you remember a lot of the good moments.
Yeah, I want to mention Christophe doesn't mention this because I think it's his nature, but he moved from Troyes to Austin as the company grew at a strategic time. There was a big investment being made and a need to really push in the US. But that's a big moment for Christophe and his family. And I don't know that I would call that scary, but there was probably elements of it.
I think if you ask my wife, she would say, yes, it was scary because she didn't speak English. My kids didn't speak English. They were 7 or 9 years old at that time. And honestly, it was really hard. Different culture. I mean, your friends and family are in France, and you're here, and especially the kids. The kids was tough because they went to school and they didn't speak English. So, it's hard. No friends and everything. So this is complicated moment. But now, 16 years later, I'm very happy, and I think we are all very happy that we did it. But these were scary moments.
Thank you. And I see that we only have a few minutes left. Maybe, Carmelo, to conclude, you can give us some perspective on the tech scene today in Texas. I mean, it has changed a lot since Christophe came. And I think Christophe was kind of a precursor. And now we have many unicorns in Texas. Maybe you can give us some information about that, the current opportunities for companies here.
Yeah, so always an interesting decision, particularly for a company that's been founded outside of the US, is where do you come to the US? There's a lot of people would say Silicon Valley, depending on your industry, it might be New York, if you're financial, fintech, financial center, Boston, because a lot of it's on the East Coast, or Miami. All Europeans like Miami for the different reason. I always get asked, what if we move to Miami? I said, well, you could move to Miami, but there's not a lot of venture capitalists in Miami, but you would be happy. So, and Austin is in that mix, and Texas is in that mix. Texas is in that mix for two reasons. If you're in Houston, because of the healthcare, life sciences, centers that are in Houston, they can be very attractive to businesses that are focused on things that are likely occurring, or they can find customers, or they can find ways to introduce their products. Johnson & Johnson has a incubator there, J&J Labs, that is a very interesting place, depending on what your technology is. But there's no question Austin is kind of the heart of the venture capital tech community in Texas, always has been. Every year, 75% of the investment throughout the state really is based here. And what's probably interesting as of late, because you don't have to live here to see it, is there's been big companies that, for reasons partially related to Texas and how interesting it is, and partially related to California and how sometimes it can be difficult to operate there, that they've announced that they're just coming to Texas. So Tesla and Elon Musk has made a big deal about Texas is the place I want to be and live. And Oracle has done a similar announcement. We constantly see financial people coming here because if you know anything about the states, taxes are different depending on which state you live in. And we have no taxes in Texas versus places where the local tax is 14%. So if you make enough money, you think about, well, geez, I'm probably in the wrong place. So so that's a dynamic, but I think that bodes well for anybody, wherever you are, to come into that environment or to try to expand your company into that environment. It usually doesn't work unless you put someone there. Usually when companies talk to me about where we're trying to do, it doesn't have to be the CEO. Christophe's, he stood up and said, I'll do it. But I think one of the founders or somebody who's kind of got a big stake and is a believer, it's very helpful to have them as part of that process, wherever it is in the United States. And I think that does then permit your company to become what LDR became, a French-American company. I think you can always just open an office. That's a dynamic, but that's very different than kind of getting much closer to the heart and core of the team and the company itself. And so I would encourage folks when I talk to them to think, the best thing is I have a great example in LDR. So I tell them, well, if you want to do it right, you should do what Christophe did and say, what did he do? He moved to Austin. That's a different conversation. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Liz, I let you conclude just before. Thank you once again, Carmelo and Christophe. And so I'm the director of the French-American Chamber of Commerce. I'm a board member with the French Tech Houston. I work with Liz. We are always super happy to help entrepreneurs. So do not hesitate to reach out to us.
Right, well said. Yeah, thank you both. So reach out. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, French Tech Austin, French Tech Houston. We love talking to young entrepreneurs. We've got great teams in both places. Just a quick reminder, this is not legal advice. We're not giving legal advice. It's just a general information. So as a lawyer too, I like to give that caveat. But thank you so much, Carmelo and Christophe, for your stories. I think we'll have some follow-up. We have a couple of questions we didn't get to, so we'll probably maybe do some articles, so look forward to some more communications on this great topic and great speakers today. So with that, we will sign off. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.